community from? I don't remember reading community in the Great Commission. Well, the reality is inside the Great Commission it says baptize them. And when it says baptize them, that's saying give them a key or a ticket to be a part of the kingdom community. That's what he's saying with that. That's the entry right that every person has when they become Christians and they become believers and they confess Christ. And then you wash them in the waters of baptism. They now become a part of the new community, the new Exodus, leaving the world system behind and going off to become its own thing. And so that's the entry point for the community of faith. Now, how do we see this actually in the Scripture? If these things that God gave us so important, I think that we would expect to see them right away in the practice of the church. And bear in mind, this is literally the first evangelistic sermon in the history of the church because it's happening on day one. The fire of God has just come down in the form of Pentecost. People are asking questions, what's going on? Why are you laughing like this? Why are you speaking in tongues? And the disciples say, well, the reason why is because Jesus has gone up to heaven. He sent down the promised Holy Spirit. And let me tell you about that. So that's what Peter does. He tells them about that. And so we see here evangelism, right? The first thing, the first activity, making disciples. Evangelism is Peter's sermon. Verses 32 through 41, we just read about that. He pleads with them, won't you come to know Jesus as Savior? Next, we see this word devoted. And it says that the people, after having been converted, 3,000 people in one day, having been converted, they were devoted to two things, fellowship and also the apostles' teaching. They were devoted to it. This is a wonderful word, by the way. We're going to look at it just a little bit further later on. Prosperero. A little hard to say. Prosperero. But the idea behind this particular word is that they clung closely to it with great effort in the face of much persecution. That's all the ideas that are carried inside this particular word. So in other words, the idea is there was difficulty, there was challenges, there was persecution, and they clung to their fellowship. And they clung to the apostles' teaching. And so I think rightfully so. They said this is the expression, this is devotion. This was something that they hung on to very close. We want to be close to these disciples that we may learn of them, and we express that in the form of discipleship. They were learning from the apostles how to be like Jesus. That's what discipleship is. At its core, discipleship is learning how to be like Jesus. They were learning from them. But also, they were involving themselves in this new community. Having been baptized into it, they devoted themselves to fellowship inside that new community. They clung to it. You know, I don't think I have to tell anybody here, by the way, that relationships are hard. Anybody think relationships are easy? Then you know, I think some of us would like to invite you inside of our homes. You know, the reality is relationships are hard, and they take work, and that's what this word expresses. There was division in the early church. We know that. We can read it inside the book of Acts itself, and we're going to visit one of those today. The next thing that we see is this idea in verse 42 is they were breaking bread and they were praying. And praying, of course, being having to do with your relationship with God, and so we slot that with worship. But then we also see breaking bread. Now, is that referring to the Last Supper? Were they taking the Lord's Supper? If so, that's an act of worship. Otherwise, it could very well be this is just they were getting together and they were eating meals together. And many Bible scholars think that's probably what was going on here. All right? In any case, they were together. They were all eating meals together. Next, we see meeting needs. They were meeting needs. Whenever anybody had a problem, what they would do is they would sell off something that they didn't need anymore because they were together, they had everything in common, and then they would sell something off so that somebody would have their needs met. And that's service. That's loving neighbor. They had everything in common. They were taking care of not only their own people, but they were also taking care of the people who were outside the fellowship. It says everyone who had a need. So if a person was not a part of that particular community, they would also meet the needs of those folks. Anyone who had a need. They were serving their neighbor, they were serving their community. They were obeying what Paul would say later on. It says, be good to everyone, especially the fellowship of the believers. I think I just did that one. All right, there we go. Worship. So then they were, in verse 46, they were worshiping, okay? They were praising God, right? And they were having everything in togetherness. And again, finally, verse 47, they were praising God, enjoying the favor of all the people. And God was adding to their number daily the people who believed, and that's evangelism. So in that particular case with the evangelism, you see that more as a team effort. We are all, as a group, kind of coming together, and we're sharing Christ. As a result, people are becoming saved. So you see it right there. They're plainly already, day one, obeying these three things that God said to do, that we're supposed to still do today. Make disciples, love God, and love people. And it's all right there. Now, when we see service in community, sometimes that loving people means we do that, especially in the context of the fellowship of believers. But then we also do it for people who are outside. We meet needs. We help out those who have challenges. I'd like to visit these. We're going to clean up the screen just a little bit there, by the way. So this is kind of the final product right there. You see all that's taking place here in Acts chapter 2. So I noticed a couple of you were taking pictures. So that's the best one that you want to take a picture of right there. And we're going to go through and we're going to visit each of these portions, some of them more than others, because I think the church has done a better job, and our church in particular has done a better job of developing some of those things like discipleship. And one of the things we've been talking about is that discipleship is likeness to Christ, right? That's learning how to be like Him. And so we go and we learn of Him, we read His Word, and we spend time together, life on life, so that we can learn how to be more like Him. But one of the things I think I'd like to spend a little bit more time on today is the idea of community. It's the idea of Christian community. So if you want to think of each of these activities as ways to kind of strengthen us in the Christian life, right? Let's just think of it that way. We're to strengthen ourselves in the Christian life. Now, some of you might be sitting there thinking, okay, well, I understand all that, but what's really in it for me? That's really not the best way to think of it. Because this is really about obedience to God. It needs to be this hard thing. And so these are 5 activities that we ought to be doing because we love Jesus and we appreciate what He did for us. But if you're not convinced, you think, okay, I really want to know what good is it for me? What do I get out of this if I do these things? Well, like any activity, you tend to get muscle strengthened, right? And I want you to think about the fellowship of believers as being like team rowing, okay? I don't know if you've seen these guys in competitions and doing team rowing, but you got to learn how to pull together, right? You got to pull together. You got to be in sync. You got to be doing your thing. And when people get out of sync, you have a coach who stands there and he says, "Okay, we need to get back in sync." And he says, "Row, row." Someone gets out of sync again. He shouts a little bit louder, "Come on, we got to get in sync. Row, row." Right? That's what they do. That's what he does. Now, let's think about this in the fact that when Luke is writing in the book of Acts here about they were devoted to this, Luke is saying these people worked hard to build a really great fellowship. And that working hard to produce a great fellowship did something that was really amazing, by the way. As Luke is describing this first community of faith, he's using language that Greeks and Romans would use to describe utopia. You know, you think about utopia and everything that carries with it, how there's peace and everybody gets along just fine and there's plenty to eat and everybody it's just a great thing that we're all doing this here together and everybody just loves each other. Utopia. The language that Luke is using here, he's using the language that Greek and Roman philosophers would use to describe utopia. He's saying, what you folks want out there, we got it. Think about that. What you want out there, and you've been talking about for years, all the way back to Socrates and Plato, you've been talking for years about having a utopia. We've got that. But don't miss the fact that it took work. Pros charactereo. We had to do this. Now, I'm sure probably Luke's primary thinking on this is he's thinking about the persecution the early church was facing, right? It was difficult. It was hard because There's things pulling at them. They've been told that if you believe Jesus is the Christ, we're going to cast you out of culture. In other words, they were doing cancel culture back then. And what cancel culture meant back then is you didn't eat. And so you needed to have a new community who would come alongside of you and make sure that you had food to eat. And that's the church. And people had to work hard to make sure that that happened. Now you need to bear something else in mind here. As you read ahead, a few chapters later, one thing that's going to happen is very interesting. Is there begins to develop a schism inside that church, that early church. And the schism breaks down along cultural background. Isn't that interesting? Cultural background. Because what happens is there are Jews who have come back to Israel, discovered this new Christian community, became a part of it, but they were all from an entirely different cultural background. Some of them from Rome, some of them from, all over the known Roman world at that time. They'd come back together, and all those people, they had different ways of worshiping God. Certainly at the core, there would be the law of Moses. But they might have different ways of worshiping God, and they were kind of like sitting there kind of going, hey, we're not exactly in agreement here. And then finally this begins to break down and devolve in a particular situation where some of the Jews who are from one part of the world are saying that the Jews from this other part of the world aren't meeting the needs of the widows of the other group. In other words, we're being discriminated against. Now, what did the church do? They said, well, then I guess we need to do a better job of making sure all those folks' needs are being met. They had to work at it. Can you imagine? I don't think you have to imagine how hard it is dealing sometimes with people from very different backgrounds. And it takes work. I remember one time I went to Florida, and we went to the Rock Church down in Orlando, Florida. I think it's closed now, actually. But my friends and I, we went down there as a couple of families to go and visit with them and to go and visit this particular church because we wanted to worship. We were away from home. We wanted to worship on Sunday morning, and so we went. And we show up, and different. It was ethnically diverse, which was wonderful. No problem there. But they had, if you look back at that quilt that Ellen made some time ago, if you look back at that quilt, if you take that quilt and you drop it all the way down to the floor, so it's from where that bar is all the way down to the floor, that's the size of the speakers they had for the sound system. And they had like 8 or 10 of them. Wow. And they were all hanging in the air above us in this arena, blasting at us for about 45 to 50 minutes. All this great Christian music, it was awesome. And everybody's sitting there, they're dancing, they're doing their thing, and everything like that. And then they get all wrapped up after about 50 minutes of worship. And then finally the pastor comes out. And the pastor comes out and she says, hey, this is all so awesome. We're having a great time worshiping God. And you can smell we got the meal cooking. It'll all be ready for 3 hours when we're done worshiping. Whoa, wait a minute. You said 3 hours more? 3 hours more of this? So we lasted in there about another 10 minutes. We white northern Protestants. And we all packed up and we left. And they came running after us. Hey, some of the ushers and things, did we offend you? Or somebody said, well, we're used to hour-long service on Sunday morning. We got plans for this afternoon. We can't stick around. And they're like, oh, okay, all right. Well, as long as we didn't offend you or anything like that. But it just was very different. Yeah. For us to have been a part of that particular denomination, it would have been a lot of work. And they were working to try and have unity with us. They ran after us. That's what it takes to make a fellowship work. It takes devotion. The same challenges, and we have to remember we are ambassadors of a peaceful kingdom. That's what Paul calls us. We are ambassadors and sharers in peace with other believers. And so that means we have to work hard to rise above secondary things that are destructive to the witness of Christianity in a world that needs reconciliation and peace. If anyone says, I love God, yet hates his brother, he's a liar. For anyone who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And if you can't love a brother and sister in Christ through a disagreement, we have a problem. Lots of secondary issues out there. And there's some things that we have to remember, hey, there's more important stuff, and one of them is that Jesus is coming back someday. He's resetting this entire planet. So everything that we are worried about here that might go away or burn down, Jesus, if you're doing a study in Revelation, one of the things that there's going to be this earthquake that wipes everything out, and there's literally not even going to be only one mountain. There's going to be one mountain in the entire face of the planet. That's how bad that earthquake's going to be. And so we worry about all this stuff and it's going away. One Mission Network now, a news organization that talks about mission issues, was describing a Billy Graham conference several years ago that had more representatives of ethnic groups and nations at that conference than were at the United Nations.
Wow.
We, as God's people, Christians, are uniquely suited to bring reconciliation and peace inside of our culture. That begins, of course, first with the offer of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Really, what fellowship can have the sons of darkness with the sons of light? We have to present the gospel and be ambassadors of that kingdom first. But having done that, we also ought to be loving our neighbor, whatever color they are, whatever their background, and sometimes that might need to be working. I remember one time I was new in ministry over in Bancroft, and a man who was part of our church, great guy, super guy, was doing a lot for us, and serving, helped paint the parsonage so I could move into it. Great wife, wonderful kids, and one day he stopped coming to church, and so I followed up. After a couple of weeks, I said, "Hey, missed you, where have you been?" And he says, "Well, we're not coming back there anymore." And I said, "Well, why?" Well, it turns out one person who was a leader inside that church gave this man a slight. A slight. And he described it what it was, and it was a slight. Like, well, okay, so I happen to know some things about the guy who gave the slight. He was going through, he had his own plate full of stuff that was going on. Really hard stuff involving his family that would make a person angry. And I said, you know, you have to remember, all these other people there think you're awesome. But he just couldn't get over it. I just, no, every time I see that guy, I just can't do it. So I said, okay. Now, what I want to tell you, and this is the hard part, is a few years later he committed suicide. Now, I'm not telling you that because he left the church he committed suicide. I am not saying that at all. Let me be very clear about that. But what I am saying is there's a forgiveness issue here because he committed a terrible sin against his wife, and not only could he not forgive himself, but she couldn't forgive him either. Because the other party inside this whole thing was his wife, who also couldn't forgive this other man for what had happened. Do you see the pattern there? Because they were unable to practice forgiveness inside the fellowship of believers where it's supposed to be easy.
That's right.
When the time came and it was hard to forgive, they had not established a practice of forgiveness inside their own lives so that he himself couldn't forgive himself, nor could she forgive him. And he said, it's not worth living anymore. And he killed himself. Now again, I'm not saying that he killed himself because he left the church. I'm saying that he killed himself because he was not living the forgiving life that Jesus says we have to live. And if you can't practice it with a brother in Christ, you've got a problem. If you're looking for perfection, by the way, read the sign when you leave today. Don't look for it in the church. It's an old saying, if you find a perfect church, don't join it because you'll ruin it. Think of it rather as a halfway house, supporting people toward wholeness. That's what we are. Some people say it's a hospital. No, you've already been declared healed.
That's right.
Think of it as a halfway house where you're learning how to live in wholeness and move back out into the community in the form of the imitation of Jesus Christ, the God of mercy and of grace.
Amen.
A Let's move on to the next activity, that's worship. And think of it as like hurdling. You see, the early church demonstrates for us unity of will in the way they worship together. And we have to understand that worship really, it focuses on the idea of the heart there. That's the seat of the will, right? You got to make a decision every day. I know what that decision feels like. It's a little bit easier for me to make that decision because I'm getting paid to do this. I got to show up to church every day, right? I mean, not only is who's going to do it, but I'm also getting paid. You folks don't have that incentive. And so every week you have to make a decision. Am I going to get up? This sounds like it's dead, is it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, it's still on. Maybe I just don't have it right here. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. Boy, I just love what coronavirus has done to my preparations every week. Let me tell you. All right. So you have this idea that every week you have to make a decision. I can sleep in fellowship with Pastor Pillow and Sister Sheets and Brother Bedstead. Right? You have that decision to make every week. And so that decision, remember, that's the seat of the will. That's the heart, is the seat of the will. And so when you have to make that decision on a week by week basis, that's like being a hurdler. You got to hurdle over your own depravity every week in a cycle, and you practice that habit of constantly saying to God, I will be obedient to you, I will show up to church. How about when the church service happens and they play music you don't like? There's an act of the will there. Okay, I don't like this song, I'm not into it. But the reality is the worship leader, the pastor, is trying to do something in me, and so is God. And so whatever it is, I'm just going to sing the words, I'm going to explore the words, I'm just going to reflect and think on, okay, what's God trying to do inside me here? I've had that experience, I know what it's like, you're worshiping, you're singing, and until I finally went and turned it over to God, and I said, okay, I don't know what they're doing here, but I just trust you. And it was at that moment that all of a sudden the conviction came, and I realized a particular piece of sin that was inside my life, and I walked out of the way from that worship service cleansed because I turned my will over to God in that moment. In Hebrew, when you look at worship, there are various body pictures. And for us, we say worship. That means it's an old English term to ascribe value to something. But in Hebrew, you see pictures of hands raised up to heaven while standing. What do we call that? We call that a surrender, right? What did the police say when they pulled you aside? Hands up.
Put your hands up.
You're surrendered. You're showing I have no weapons.
That's right.
How about kneeling down? A position of humble prostration before somebody, or even just out and out laying down prostration. You're saying I'm making myself vulnerable before you. That's worship in God's eyes. It's an act of the will. It's a whole life thing. Now, in order to be blessed, we have to understand that there is a turning over the will that must happen even throughout the course of the worship service. Even the talky part, like right now. It says something about the state of your heart in any given moment. I've been there, I've been in the seats, and I feel the pushback coming up inside my soul. Well, I don't have to do that. And I usually justify that as, well, I wouldn't preach it that way. But I wasn't, right? But the reality is I have to sit there and I have to reassess. In this moment, as the pastor's preaching to me, as the worship leader is saying something to me, as I'm listening to the song, if I'm feeling pushback inside my soul, that's a chance to do that checkup inside your heart. Say, God, what are you saying to me right now here in this moment? Being yielded to God is necessary for a successful Christian life, and I want to show you some Bible verses that say the same thing. He is like a stream planted by streams. He is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and his leaf does not wither. Whatever he does, he prospers. Psalm 1:3. Jeremiah 7:23. But I gave them this command: obey me, and I will be your God, and you will be my people. Walk in all the ways I command you, that it may go well with you. I prayed to God, to the Lord my God, and confessed, O Lord, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with all who love him and obey his commands. That's Daniel chapter 9. And then lastly, John chapter 14, verse 21. Whoever has my commands and obeys them, he is the one who loves me. He who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love him and show myself to him. Friends, it's a case closed. Surrendering the will in obedience to your God is critical for a satisfactory Christian life.
Amen.
Third activity that we're going to explore today is service. The early church demonstrates for us in Acts chapter 2 that needs meeting was part of their self-sacrificial activity. They were one, they had all things in common, and they even in their divisions, they sought to serve each other. I think of it as kind of like weightlifting. You start small and you work your way up, right? There is a song that says, little is much when God is in it. We're a small church. We're not able to go out and change the world the way some ministries can, but we can do a little.
That's right.
And the stronger that we get, the more that we do it, the stronger we'll get. Absolutely. As we grow, our church will look for ways to actively serve our community, and we are already doing that. Right now, we are doing little things. Did you know that we gave out yet another $50 gift certificate to a family that had a need? That's serving our community. We're also going to be showing up at Haven Place Family Day. We give away water there every year. This year, we're going to be supporting the expansion of the gospel of the kingdom inside of our community through Haven Place Family Day by partnering with Child Evangelism Nelson. We're going to have a pinata out there that whenever some kid goes through their program, we can let them beat the pinata. Right? We give away money to needy families. We show kindness to our neighbor. Christmas caroling. That's going to be a thing again this year. We're going to have Christmas calendar. We're going to be a little more prepared for that this year. If we have new people that come, one of the things they can get is a little folder that's in the back there. It's got a McDonald's gift certificate for $10. They can take their family out afterwards for some coffee. Little things. And the more we do these little things, the stronger that we'll get. We just have to keep identifying the itches that need to be scratched inside of our community. And right now, what people want most is the hope for a future. We can provide that. They want to be seen and cared for. We can provide that. They want a meaning for their life. We can show them the way. We as a church can provide all those things because of our connection to Jesus Christ. Discipleship, that's the fourth activity that we're going to explore today. Consider how many hours each week you're bombarded by the world, the flesh, and the devil. I want you to, first of all, total up the amount of time you spend watching the TV. Every single minute of that time on TV, unless it happens to be a Christian preacher, is you're going to be bombarded by the world, the flesh, and the devil. So add all that up. Add all that up when you're reading the newspapers, world, the flesh, and the devil. Worldly books, the world, the flesh, and the devil. Right? When you're out in your communities and you're doing your events out there, and you should be. But you're in your club, if that's not a Christian organization, world, the flesh, and the devil. I'm not saying you shouldn't be involved in those things. I'm not saying you shouldn't be consumers of culture at all. I'm just saying you have to remember you're being bombarded by the messages of the world, the flesh, and the devil when those things come. Now, the people back in that early church, they knew the same thing. And so what they did was cross car to rail. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. They spent time with it. They clung to it, even in the midst of difficulty. Why did they have to be devoted? Well, it's because being like Jesus is a pretty tall order. It is. It's hard. That's why we need to have a Savior in the first place, because He's the measuring stick. Jesus had to come and die on the cross just to enable us to even start becoming like Him. You know, one of the things that happens is when you enter into a sport, and it's like bodybuilding here in this case, right? And back in the day, people who were bodybuilders might put up, this is what Arnold looks like, this is his exercise routine. And they would try and be like Arnold, right? They would make sure their whole life was dedicated around to success in this particular endeavor. The same thing has to characterize our life. We have to be like Jesus. It's hard. It's a tall order. And we have to devote ourselves to that if we're going to be successful with it. For those of you ladies who are not happy with sports metaphors, this is the last one. But it's football. And I think most of us have a pretty good idea about football. Football is basically taking a ball and trying to move it across the line on the other side of the field, right? Simple as that. All right? It's not a home run that you get when you get the other side, it's a touchdown. All right? No worries there. Sorry, just a little bit of humor on that. Nobody's laughing. I'm in trouble. So, all right. So here we are. We're talking about football here. It's about taking a ball and moving it across the line. And every time you need to have your team behind you, right? Evangelism is also a team effort. Oftentimes we think of evangelism as me being asked to go out, and me, you can supply your name inside that. Me being asked to go out, stand on a street corner, and harangue people passing by. Or passing out tracts. Or taking a tract and leaving it in the bathroom stall. That's evangelism, right? That's oftentimes how we were taught how to do evangelism. Stealth evangelism. You leave the tract bomb inside the bathroom stall, right? That's only a part of what evangelism is. And it requires a team. Evangelism is not simply learning John 3:16 and then saying that every time someone wants to come to know Jesus. But it also requires developing a personal testimony. How is it that you came to know Jesus as your Savior? It's also about thinking through world events and culture critically, rationally, in light of the Christian worldview. It's about apologetics. That's the idea of Christian defenses. Being able to argue with people about the fact that Jesus really did come and he died on the cross. If any of you saw my little mini series that I've been doing, those are examples of doing apologetics, and I insert those in sermons all the time. Be listening for those. Because these are things you can take out, you can hand to people and just kind of say, well, have you ever thought about this? See, the reality is, the Scripture very plainly says in Ephesians chapter 4 that we are given a team to support the growth of the church, and that team includes evangelists. Now, an evangelist is somebody who's that's like your star player, right? That's Billy Graham, okay? If we have Billy Graham on the screen, he'd be our star player. That's oftentimes what we think of as evangelism. I'll just take them to an evangelism event with Billy Graham, and the person will get saved, right? But the reality is, most people get saved more like this. Sarah and Jesse, sitting on a bench, reading Scripture together, and the lights come on. And you yourself can be prepared with tools as part of your team to work together with others in conjunction with your church. You know, one of the things that we do is every year you can bank on it. Every year you can bank on it. At Christmas time, I'm going to do a series that, guess what? It's evangelistic in emphasis. At Christmas time, about the baby Jesus. And every year you can bank on it. It's been that same way every year so far that I've been here. It's going to be that way from now on in perpetuity. At Easter time, through Lent, I'm going to do an evangelistic series. Plan to bring your friends. Learn some things in that period that you can share with other people and lay on them and say, hey, guess what? This Jesus, he's really real. Share with them the videos I put up about my own testimony of faith. And the whole idea is that as a team, you take this ball, which is the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and you're moving it across, as a team, across the goal, which is the person coming to know Jesus as Savior. You don't have to do it all yourself. Take advantage of the training. Take advantage of other people. Have a Bible study. Invite your friends over here from the church. And then invite your 2 or 3 friends who are curious about the Bible. I'll come and lead it. If you want to do that. If you want to invite some people over your house who are not saved, invite a couple of Christian friends here from the church, I'll come over and I'll teach you. I'll do a short series, Introduction to the Bible. All right? Take advantage of your team that we can bring other people to come to know the hope of Jesus Christ in their own lives too. Heavenly Father, we do thank you for the fact that you gave us these 5 activities. Easy and it's hard. We know and understand that we have these 2 rules to obey. Love you and love our neighbor. That we are to make disciples, making them part of our community, sharing with them about the fact that you have a kingdom that's coming and training to be like you. Thank you, Lord, that you gave us this team, this community. I'm praying right now today, Lord, that you would help us all to take advantage of what this team has to offer. That your name would be glorified in the presence of your people. We want to see New Haven come to know Jesus as Savior. We want to see Lenox Township. We want to see Richmond, Mount Clemens, Chesterfield. Lord, help it to start right here. Help us to make a difference. And we do ask all this in the sovereign name of Jesus Christ.